Welcome back, Fragrance Fiend here today with Santal Volcanique by Maison Crivelli, a 2018 release, obviously an eau de parfum. As you can guess, it's in that woody spicy category. The brand has really taken off in previous years, but I think this one used to be one of the best sellers and it's taken a tiny bit of a backseat since hibiscus and oud maracuja have taken over. Before we get into it, let's hear a tiny bit about the inspiration behind the scent before we smell it. Santal Volcanique emulates the scent of scorched sandalwood on the slopes of an erupting volcano. Be surprised by the contrast of potent and addictive sandalwood, brightened by the vibrant notes of a spicy coffee. This one uses a lot of natural ingredients and essential oils, and they include ginger, cardamom, limette, sandalwood, cedar, ylang, coffee, absolute, and musks. So I actually have smelt this one a few times, and it didn't actually wow me purely because I sprayed it on paper, but today I actually sprayed it on my skin for the very first time, and it was a game changer. Obviously things smell very different on paper opposed to skin, but you'll find that a fragrance won't develop as much on paper, especially if they're using natural ingredients, which is what Maison Crivelli are all about. So let's give it a little spray. So as you can imagine, it opens up quite warm, very woody. The spice isn't as out there as you kind of expect for a fragrance with the name Volcanique, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, as not many of us want to smell ashy. And I actually think it's quite the appropriate amount of cardamom in there, which gives it that spicy element. It's not too much. But straight off the bat, you definitely get hit with that coffee note. I wouldn't really call it like a roasted bitter coffee. It's more of a creamy alternative, and just the kind that I like. I've smelled a lot of coffee fragrances before. It's one of my favorite notes in perfumes, but so many get it so wrong. This one really does play with your expectations though. It's not as leathery as I guess what you may assume. It's very warm, and at some point it teeters under gourmand territory as the coffee begins to develop a little more and it gets a little more warmer and almost edible. That ginger note also adds another element to the fragrance, which gives it a bit more of a contrast, which interplays with the more fresher elements of the fragrance, as I believe it does have a bit of lime in there as well. So this one is definitely not your everyday boring average sandalwood scent. It's a lot more complex than that. I've grown tired of a lot of basic woody scents, especially in the niche territory where they kind of brand themselves as luxurious and it's just using natural ingredients, but they don't make it too interesting. And having worn it on my skin for the very first time today after smelling it multiple times on paper has really given me a new level of respect for this fragrance and the brand as well. It's definitely quite an intriguing scent, which I quite like. I can't even remember the last time where I sprayed on a fragrance and I was smelling myself every few minutes just to get another whiff and see where it's going. I have actually read a few reviews about this one, and I find a lot of people aren't really sticking around for that dry down. They're basing it off that initial impression, which is what so many people do nowadays. And of course this one does come at a tiny bit more of a premium price tag. However, these do include a lot more natural materials than a lot of their more niche counterparts, so it does seem like a tiny bit of a stretch for a brand that isn't as well known as the other ones in the big leagues, but they're definitely climbing the ladder. What I will say though, after the dry down, that the spice does die down quite fast. You're left with more of a sweeter woody element, almost under that woody ambery category. I wouldn't really classify it too much as a woody spicy fragrance aside from that opening. This one definitely has almost a tiny bit of an Aesop vibe if you have smelt their fragrances before. It's got that very natural organic woodiness to it. The sandalwood for this one is also actually harvested from my state of Western Australia, since Indian sandalwood is a little more protected, so a lot of brands like even Le Labo are harvesting our sandalwood. So the performance isn't super over the top, but it's far from weak. You get about 7-8 hours out of it, which is generally the median for a fragrance like this. First 4 hours though, it definitely projects really well, leaves a really lovely sillage. It's quite strong, but as mentioned, after that 4-hour mark it will begin to die down a bit. I think it's quite a good beginner niche fragrance for people who've bought a lot of designers and want to move up their taste a bit. This one's definitely a little more sophisticated in contrast. It is unisex, but it might lean a tiny bit more masculine, but there's nothing overly definable about that. After that 4-hour mark though, after the cardamom and coffee have disappeared, the musks do come out a tiny bit more, and the sandalwood sits a little more subtly, but it's still quite likable all throughout. If you're not necessarily a fan of this one, I also recommend checking out Menthol Papyrus, which also feature a tobacco note as well. Otherwise, check out Oud Maracuja, one of their extracts. It's absolutely intense, but it's an incredible fragrance, which I might do a review on soon. So I've got the US prices here, but if you're Australian, it will cost you $165 for 30ml or $349 for 100ml. As much as I appreciate the brand, I might grab a 30ml of one of their fragrances one day, but 100ml is just a tiny bit too much to chew through. If you are discovering Maison Crivelli though, definitely keep your blotters at least for a few hours, as these ones do transition quite a bit. As they dry down, they're not linear at all, which is exactly what you want out of a fragrance. And then also be sure to skin test them, because I never did until today. As much as I appreciate the art and creativity behind this fragrance, it's not necessarily one I would wear every day or once a week. It's just not really that type of category that I wear that often, hence why I have a sample and not a full bottle. But if you're someone who likes more natural smelling woodier fragrances, then this is definitely one I suggest to you. Or if you're a fan of Aesop fragrances and you want to step up your game and wear something a little more stronger and complex. But anyway, that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.